Experimental theater tends to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What it means to me, when I think about experimental theater, I think of it in the same way, I guess, as a science experiment. Like, what would happen if there's certain ways that theater gets done and stories get told that we're all used to, and experimental theater tends to ask what would happen if you don't do that. What would happen if you try to find a different way to tell a story? What would happen if you don't tell any story at all? What happens inside an audience's mind when there is no story? Do they create a story of their own, even if you are doing your best not to put one out there? What happens if you mix genres so that maybe modern dance and theater happen side by side or somehow mesh together? There's a lot of groups out right now that sort of call what they do dance theater. I think that's a pretty big movement in Europe right now, and that's one of the groups that we're bringing in. I think Red Metal Mailbox would describe themselves that way. So that's how I think about experimental theater, and the one caveat to it all is, again, that I think a lot of people, when they think of experimental theater, they think weird, uncomfortable, strange people in a dark room doing weird things, and there is that element to it. There are those people out there, and I'm actually not, some of it's actually pretty good. But what we're looking at, and when we decided to start talking about this festival, we wanted to just make it clear that experimental theater, it can actually be entertaining, and it can actually be for the whole family. And so at least a couple of our shows really are, I think, family friendly.
Right.
I remember when I was in Frankfurt, I went to see a Robert Wilson play, an opera, and it was so strange because it was very expressionistic, and it would be the sort of thing that might be very difficult for Americans to understand. But the audience for that play in Germany wasn't just like theater people. Like when you go see weird theater here, it's almost always just theater people in the audience. It was like moms and dads and kids all watching this really weird expressionistic play, and it just made me realize that, these kids were liking it because they had grown up watching that. And so, I don't know, I'd like to think maybe
That
this
would be
might open some minds.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this breaking the fourth wall you were mentioning the last time?
Oh yeah, I mean, in terms of like what would happen if, what happens if you break the fourth wall, or the wall between the audience and the performers. And so this notion that there's a whole bunch of people out there watching a bunch of people up here doing something, and we're pretending that we don't know you're there, and you're accepting that convention that we're pretending that you blah blah blah. Well, what happens if you just tear that all down and say, hey, we're all in this space together, and in that way it's sort of a celebratory kind of I guess mood that's created in the room, and in some ways it's almost like a circusy kind of feel, I guess, that we're throwing something out there for you, and if we do a good job, you're throwing something else back at us, your laughter or your energy or your oohs and ahs, whatever it is, but that there's a acknowledgement of the relationship between the audience and the performers that is not always there in traditional theater, where there's this assumed where really the audience is just sort of voyeurs supposedly watching something.
Future is so unknown, kind of like the work itself. But the plan is to continue to build on what we started with. Whether it's to do more events, whether it's to open people up to have this become part of a normal theater experience, which isn't quite what it is now, which is to give new artists and new groups the chance to show their work on a venue that's maybe larger than what they might do in their own hometown. And certainly from our perspective as a department, to find a niche that we fill both for our students and for the university, to bring notoriety to both. And what that plan is, I don't know. Next year, we're talking about maybe going into a little more mask kind of work, and maybe one man, one person show kind of work, and what it takes to create that. So I don't know that we're looking at a theme for every year. I do think we're looking to explore personally and individually, and as an artistic director and a producer, what we can do best and what interests us in terms of what we think would be appealing. I don't have a bigger answer than that. It's going to partly be predicated on funding, and if we can continue to get funded and find new sources of funding or grant money. And we're thinking big. That's, we won't be faulted for not thinking big. And we'll see. I still think we're of the mindset, build it and they will come. So we're in that cornfield now, clearing away the field.